Members, good morning. This is the appointed time and we have a quorum. The Deputy Chair, Mr. Roy Kwong, was attacked yesterday and he is still in hospital. I hope that the perpetrators will be punished by the law as soon as possible, and I hope that he will have a speedy recovery. There has been 3 papers issued since the last meeting. There is one joint letter dated the 20th of March asking for rescheduling of all committee meetings which are unrelated to the issues about COVID-19. The second one is an information paper by the administration about extra allowance for recipients of Social Security payments and individual-based work incentive transport subsidy. Another one is a letter dated the 4th of May from Dr. Kokaki requesting the panel on health services to hold a joint meeting with this panel to discuss the provision of medical and financial support for those who have recovered from COVID-19. Now I'd like to sound members out. The original schedule is a discussion in a joint meeting on the 8th of June at 10:45 with the Home Affairs panel on 2 matters: work progress of the Family Council and language support services and dedicated outreach services teams for ethnic minorities. Any questions? After the joint meeting, we will proceed to the regular meeting of this panel to discuss about special schemes on privately owned sites for welfare users. No objections? That will be the arrangement then. There is a proposal for setting up a subcommittee on issues relating to the Silver Age card under this panel. Mr. Leung Chee-Chang and Mr. Wilson all sent a letter to us on the 10th of January requesting the panel to form a subcommittee to discuss issues relating to the provision of Silver Age card for people aged between 60 and 64. Well, on the 19th, there is a paper sent to us about the work plan as well as the schedule. We have now to decide whether to set up this subcommittee. I now defer to Mr. Leung Chee-Chang about the work of the subcommittee. Thank you. I ask after Mr. Roy Kwong, I hope that he will have a speedy recovery. In relation to the setting up of a subcommittee on Silver Age card, I'm not going to go into details because you will find the same in my paper. I'd only like to add on 2 things. The Chief Executive announced that the $2 transport concessionary fare will be extended to those between the age of 60 and 64, which is similar to our idea of a Silver Age card. But the Silver Age card doesn't just give you concessionary transport fares. I ask members to support the setting up of a subcommittee. Those who are between the age of 60 and 64 are still working. Will there be some concessionary tax allowance available to them? And those who have just retired might have a weaker health or physical condition. We ask the government to provide elderly healthcare vouchers like those above the age of 65 so that they can have more body checks, so that their health can be improved, so that there can be some preventive treatment given to them. So the Silver Age card is not just about concessionary transport fares. The list can go on. Let me give you another 2 examples. Concessionary tax allowances and healthcare support. I ask members to support the setting up of a subcommittee to look into this issue so that those in this age group will get proper protection and assistance. Any views? If not, well, we still have to have a show of hands. Those who are in favor of setting up a subcommittee on issues relating to the Silver Age Card, please raise your hands. There is unanimous support. I will inform the House Committee. I think this is the first in the queue. Next, item 4, annual briefing on welfare facility projects funded by the Lotteries Fund. Let's invite the administration to join us.
就住呢個題目呢，
In relation to this topic, we have Dr. Lo Chi Kwong, Secretary for Labour and Welfare, Mr. Joan Wong, Deputy Secretary, Mr. Lam Ka Tai, Deputy Director of Social Welfare, Ms. Barbara Chu, Senior Principal Executive Officer of the Social Welfare Department, and Mr. Andy Liu, Chief Executive Officer of the same department.
好，局長坐定之後呢，就可以麻煩你可以介紹一下文件啦嚇，最多係5分。
Secretary, please take us through the paper. You have 5 minutes. I will brief members on new welfare facility projects in 2020 to 21. In the annex, you will find a list of various projects and their progress that have been reported to members. There are 12 applications in the coming year. 4 of them are public housing, 3 are special schemes on privately owned sites, and there are also some from housing society and some other schemes. There are 9 RCHEs, 8 daycare center for elderly, 4 neighborly center, 4 homes for people with disability, as well as other shelter workshops and service centers. Previously, we have reported to members about the application for funding under the Lotteries Fund set out in Annex 2, 27 RCHEs, some daycare center, 18 homes for PWDs, 7 shelter workshops, as well as some other childcare service centers. We think that these projects will be commissioned starting from 2020-24. As you know, that we have submitted an application for $20 billion to procure some properties. They are mainly for community care service, say daycare center, childcare centers, etc. We hope that on the 15th of this month, it will appear in the agenda of the Finance Committee. I ask members to support our application so that there will be more premises for the provision of social welfare services. Thank you. Members, you may make comments. Each member will have 4 minutes. If you'd like to speak or ask questions, please indicate. Mr. Leung Chee Chang. Sorry, Mr. Poon Siu Ping, Mr. Wilson, or Dr. Fernando Zhang, and Mr. Leung Chee Chang, and then myself. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you. Of course, we support the provision of additional welfare services as soon as possible. Just now, as the Secretary mentioned, there are about a dozen projects in Annex 1. A lot of them are under planning. Is there a time limit? In Annex 2, you said that the earliest it will be 2023-24 when services are commissioned. I am concerned because for some projects, consultation with the district council is needed. Will there be potential delay? Are there any ways to compress the time taken by these projects? Secretary. We have already completed a community or district level consultation for those in Annex 1. We will consult district councils for new projects. Some of these projects have gone through consultation with previous district councils. That's why they are here.
Just now we talked about Annex 2, and those are about 3 years later, 2023. Those are last year or the year before last year when we presented to this panel. From the year before last year to 2023 is 5 years' time. It is not very ideal. When it comes to privately developed projects, usually they are faster because there is time limit. So when private developers buy a land, and if the plan involves social welfare facilities, then because they would like the private properties to be completed soon, so they will do the work as soon as possible. So in fast cases, 5 to 7 years. In case of GIC facilities or sites, the overall planning involves a lot of work, and so it involves like 7 to 12 years' time. And for us, the faster, the better. And there are a lot of procedures. In some cases, the projects do not only involve SWD, there's the need of collaboration with other departments, and then there would be more work involved. But we will do the work as soon as possible. So for those on Annex 1, those under preparation, there is still not a concrete timetable yet. No time limit. Our goal is to complete planning as soon as possible. And then we can apply to the lotteries fund for the required resources. Any follow-up, Mr. Poon? No. Mr. Oh Chong Shing? Thank you, Chairman. On this item, I support it very much because it involves the socially disadvantaged groups, and if we do not start these services, then the time gap will be bigger and bigger. Let me follow up on Mr. Poon's question. Perhaps the Secretary can help us find some solutions. To be honest, for these projects, the progress is really not satisfactory. Despite all the procedures, the beneficiaries, especially the socially disadvantaged groups, have been waiting for a long time for these services. So can the Secretary be more aggressive? Can you think of ways to compress the time and procedures? I understand that the government needs to complete many administrative procedures and consult many stakeholders. Let me give an example. In Annex 1 of the paper, Wong Tai Sin Mei Tong Estate redevelopment. There would be 150 places in an elderly home, and in March 2020, consultation of district council was done. But then only in 2028-29 will services be offered in phases. So people waiting for the places may not be able to be admitted even till their death. So just now, Secretary, you presented the difficulties. Are there ways to accelerate? My understanding is that other bureau, apart from the Labor and Welfare Bureau, need to work together. But are there some measures to speed up things, Secretary? Secretary, can you compress the time and go faster? Mr. Orr just mentioned the one in Wong Tai Sin, because that involves the redevelopment of public housing. And there are many problems in relation to the land or site. Of course, we are very anxious. We would like to complete the work as soon as possible. Let me give an example. In some cases, redevelopment and new development are involved, and there are things not anticipated in the initial plan. In some cases, the obstacle comes from a few trees. So trees will have to be transplanted, or whether the trees should be felled. Different departments will have to be consulted to decide how the trees should be handled. So only a few trees can cause a delay for 6 to 9 months. So these are not foreseeable at the beginning. So any project may involve like a dozen departments, not only one department. So please understand that we are subject to many rules. In a city, there are a lot of factors that we need to consider. Just now, I gave an example about trees. Secretary, sorry, my time is limited. I would like to interrupt. Secretary, I understand, but then there are more solutions than problems. You gave a very typical example. But from the public point of view, you are one government. And those people who are waiting for the facilities have been waiting eagerly. And so, Secretary, can you promise to review the process? You talked about trees. So can you ask your colleagues to work faster or review the whole process? Can you help us to review the process to see whether there is any room for expedition? Can you help? Yes, we will always review, but there is the need for an outcome. If there is no outcome, then it is useless. Dr. Fernando Chang. Thank you, Chairman. Delay in project or delay in welfare facilities, especially for some homes or facilities, urgently needed. Just now, the Secretary talked about trees, but our experience is that it is because of bureaucracy. For example, in Tuen Mun, the Kelang Primary School, the school campus has been left idle for 10 years, and it can be converted into a complex offering elderly accommodation spaces. Now, in 2010, the feasibility study was completed. Progress has been good, but up till now, it is still an idle site. In 2015, Mr. Matthew Zhang was in your position. He said that he was happy because in Tuen Mun, Taipo, Sai Kung, there are 3 vacant school campuses, which will constitute a comprehensive welfare service complex of a good scale. And there are 300-odd places for the elders. But now in Tuen Mun, the sites are still idle. Cable TV has prepared a very detailed report. Actually, you may view it. That is the Lancet of cable TV. So there has been a few years after the broadcast of that program. So what's the progress now? Will it be completed soon? Chairman, you may remember that some time ago at PWSC, we had an argument about the lotteries fund being used for the isolation camp. I am shocked. Secretary, perhaps you can explain. The Director of Social Welfare is the Chairman of the Lotteries Fund. And it should be used for social welfare purpose. In the ordinance, well, there is the lotteries ordinance and also the goal, the objective of the lotteries fund. But then I don't know why money goes to the isolation camp. So it is not in line with the objective. 1.1 billion was set aside. This is a very big project. As a result, the balance was reduced by 10%. But then there was not any tendering requirements. So money is passed on to other government departments for use without the need for tendering. So the money was given to a company to work in Penny's Bay. Now, if NGO apply for lotteries fund, there is a lot of procedure, including tendering. So I don't understand why there is such a serious problem in the governance of the lotteries fund. There are two entirely different approaches. You have 30 seconds left. About Keelung Primary School progress, if you refer to item 15 of Annex 2, then you will be able to see the work. Now, in 2023 to 24, it should be commissioned. That's our estimate. I don't know whether the Deputy Director has any supplement. Now, concerning Tuen Mun Former Keelung Primary School, it will be modified into a comprehensive welfare complex. In 2018 December, we got funding from Lotteries Fund to conduct the detailed design consultancy work. And in May last year, we appointed a consultant company to do detailed consultancy study for the project. And now the detailed design plan will be given or passed on to an independent vetting group under Housing Department for scrutiny. And so we believe that in Q3 of next year, work can start. In 2022 to 23, work will be completed. Chairman, for this project, this school will have been left idle for 16 years upon your projected completion time. Are you happy with this progress? Chairman, you know what happened in the interim period. A lot of things happened. There were different views in society. We don't want to see any delay. Let's seize the time because there are many items on our agenda today. Mr. Leung Yiu-chung. Thank you. Just now, Mr. Oh Chang-shing made some points. Those actually are feelings and comments of the elders and their family members because they want their elderly family members to have good environment to live in. But then it seems that the government is only doing the talk with nothing concrete. One of the reasons for the delay is perhaps the change of personnel, the change of secretary and officials. So as a result, there is a delay. Is that the reason? Perhaps you can explain later. Secretary, I can see that there are some projects in which facilities will be built on redeveloped estates, including home for the elderly. In Wong Tai Sin Mei Tong Estate, there are homes of other nature, including special childcare center and also centers for the severely handicapped. And there are only 30 hostel places for the severely handicapped and 50 places for another daycare center and 30 places in a girls' home. Now, most will be neighborhood care centers or elderly care homes. I don't know how the secretary sees this. So, are there too few places? It seems that the supply can never meet the demand. So, in these projects, can there be more places of different nature to satisfy different families' needs? Secretary, Chairman, usually when projects need a long duration, that's because controversy in the districts. As far as I can remember, one of the projects that took a lot of time was hostel for severely handicapped from planning till completion, 25 years. So that's because there are different views in the district about site selection. So the land use issue spent the most time for the item or project in Meitong Estate. Land available for provision of service and also the overall land use, including public housing. Well, we have to strike a balance among these. The overall density is its upper ceiling, and there is the need for reasonable distribution or allocation. I am also very anxious.
比較細嘅。
Sometimes these sites are rather small. One of the considerations is that we would like to provide services at different locations. So we'd rather have several locations instead of one centralized location. I do agree with you, there are merits. However, what I see from the project is that not just RCHE, for the others, there is a very small number in their places. I just ask you to increase the number of places. We'll consider that. We have to consider cost effectiveness as well, because if the center is too small, it may not be cost effective. Mr. Leung Chee-chung. I support these projects. There is an acute demand for social services. The Secretary said that he would do as best as he could. In new public housing estates, you can add these services and there won't be much resistance. I see that as what you have been doing already. But what about the service capacity? Can you increase it? You don't just serve that public housing estate, not just in Hong Shui Kiu. People from other districts may go to Hong Shui Kiu. The Secretary mentioned about $20 billion to acquire properties. That is just to try to address previous shortages. Well, the project is under construction in Hong Shui Kiu. Will you take the chance to increase service capacity? Will you consider that? The second point. Well, there is a limit, $10 million. It may be better this year, but for previous years, every year there is an increase in cost. So $10 million threshold may not be enough. Of course, if there is a cap, it is better. Without a cap, maybe it's difficult for the applying organizations. There are more limitations in redevelopment. In Annexes 1 and 2, you find bigger projects in new development areas or on private land developments. In public housing estates, we will have to strike a balance. There are different factors in different projects. We have a planning standard for elderly services. This helps us to get more elderly services resources. For rehabilitation services, we're about to finish our work on planning. We will change the planning standard. This will help us to get a higher level of provision of these services. Mr. Cheng Chung Tai. We do understand that regarding redevelopment projects using the lotteries fund, there are difficulties. In recent years, in new development areas or new public housing estates, there is a bigger and bigger time lag from planning to commissioning. For Area 103 Tung Chung public housing estate projects, from the information of the Development Bureau, it says that the target is for population intake in 2024-25. For Neighborhood Center for Elderly Centers, as well as the Integrated Family Service Center, there is a 2025-26. So there is a 2-year vacuum. It's not a very long time. Soi Chun O Estate is another example. When there is a service provision vacuum, and when the public housing estate is on a hill or in a remote area, the 2-year gap or vacuum will cause a lot of difficulties to residents. Are there any ways to ensure smooth transition in the provision of social welfare services? There are 3 other public housing estates to be developed in Tung Chung. NGOs are in a plight. How can you ensure that there is sufficient manpower support going to Area 109? I understand that there are difficulties with redevelopment projects. Why are there restrictions in new development areas? For Wang Chao, there is a target date. According to the Lotteries Fund, regarding residential rehabilitation services, they are all under planning. There isn't a date for Tung Chung Area 103. That's why I am so anxious as to get the information from you. We often discuss about what Mr. Chang mentioned. Say, for example, the time lag between population intake and the commissioning of social welfare facilities. What we'd like to do better is the planning work of social welfare facilities. We will enhance collaboration with other departments. There will be restructuring within the social welfare department. In Annex 2, you find dozens of projects. There are about a dozen new projects. On top of that, if we get the $20 billion, then we do need better collaboration. Last year, we have submitted a paper about restructuring within the social welfare department. We're still waiting in the queue to create the posts required. I often heard from NGOs about complaining about the long application time. After I've asked my questions, there is still time. So if you'd like to have a second round, you may do so. There are a number of RCHE projects. I'd like to ask about ratio. In planning new contract homes, there is a ratio of 6:4. That is, subvented places to non-subvented places. That ratio is unreasonable. The administration said that for subvented places, the gap, the shortfall is getting bigger and bigger. There are still 40% of places that are non-subvented. In 2015, there is an additional clause in the contract allowing the adjustment of the ratio of subvented places and non-subvented places according to the situation. How many RCHEs constructed by funded by the Lotteries Fund has a better ratio than 60:40? How many of such RCHEs are in the pipeline? I will provide you the information after the meeting. As the chairperson said, sometimes because of local demand and supply, there are homes that have a better ratio. It can be as high as 80%. The size of the home is also a factor. If it is a sizable home, well, 40% of self-financed places might not make the operation of the home viable. I'll supply you with further information afterwards. Assistant Deputy Director, anything to add? In contract homes, in April 2014, in Shan Shui Po, there was a contract home set up. The ratio was 80:40. And in 2012 August, there is another home in Junwan. The ratio of subvented to non-subvented places is 83% to 17%. As the Secretary said, we have to take into account the size of the homes to make the adjustment. Chairperson, you asked about an update of the situation. In the fiscal year just passed and this fiscal year, there are altogether 5 contract homes that have been commissioned. 3 of them have a better ratio than 60-40. You will give me the information afterwards, right? Second round, we have Mr. Wilson Orr and Dr. Fernando Zhang. Mr. Orr. I have a question for the secretary. You said you would go back to review this the process. I'd like to ask, you have to start planning for future projects. You said you would do it according to planning standards. Can you tell us, if not now, in writing, that for the coming 5 years, what will be the provision of various social welfare facilities? We see a problem, we find a solution, but there is also the transitional arrangement. Are there ways to expedite the commissioning of these facilities in the coming 5 years? Can you give me information about the locations of these facilities in the coming 5 years?
Annex 2 sets out the projects that will be built with the related timetable. So, of course, we can continue to update the progress. But if you talk about things that have not been planned yet, then I can't give you an answer. Because, as you know, the lead comes from the Development Bureau. So our bureau doesn't know what land will be available for development. And as you know, sale of land planned will be announced during the budget speech, and it is difficult for us to tell you what land will be sold in the coming 5 years. So if you refer to Annex 1, there are a number of projects involving private land, and provisions that we added will include welfare facilities. So we cannot give advance notice because we don't know. So definitely, we can't give an answer when sale of land is involved. Dr. Fernando Zhang, Chairman, just now I asked another question about 1.1 billion being set aside by the Lotteries Fund for the isolation camp. I asked about the objective and the procedure. So when funding is given to NGO, there is a must for tendering, but why not? Why no tendering for giving money to other government departments? In the annex, when you look at all those projects, land is sold to developers, and rehabilitation service and different kinds of centers will be built then. Now, why don't you ask the developers to absorb the construction cost instead of using the lotteries fund? Upon sale of land, the terms should include these requirements. So shouldn't the cost be included there? Chairman, I think this point has been made many times. Regarding building of quarantine center, I'm sure you are all concerned about tendering, but in urgent cases, when the government conducts tendering, we receive criticisms from the public that the government is not fast enough in handling the epidemic. So in the initial stage of the epidemic, the government wants those centers to be completed as soon as possible, because we don't know how many people need quarantine. We don't know whether the number is in the thousands or 10,000s, so we can't conduct tendering. At the beginning, when quarantine centers were built, please understand that there is an urgency involved. The Development Bureau had said that some other quarantine facilities will be built by means of tendering. Recently, the epidemic is sort of alleviated, and in that case, we can consider conducting tendering. For lotteries fund, we always need to look at the use of funds, whether it is in line with the objective of the lotteries fund, and whether those are some fixed facilities or designated facilities for which funds can be allocated from the lotteries fund. And for facilities related to health, those are in line with the lotteries fund objectives. And when it comes to camps, those are also allowed facilities under the lotteries fund. So when you look at the lotteries fund itself or permitted facilities, I think all the criteria are satisfied. Then when it comes to sale of land, I have considered this point. Can we ask the developer to build according to our specifications? And then, is it better for them to include construction cost upon sale of land? Now, the specifications are set by us. And should we pay the construction costs according to our specifications? Well, there is not really much difference. If you ask the developer to construct those, then they will include the cost in the tender price. Now, under our current approach, they don't need to count the construction costs. However, the construction specifications and monitoring will be in line with the lotteries fund. Now, we think that the current approach is more reliable. And I think monitoring is made easier. Chairman, I want to follow up. The important point is, can lotteries fund make use of the resources for the sake of social welfare? And are there enough resources to provide the relevant facilities? No matter whether we are talking about isolation camp or whether money should be paid by the developers or lotteries fund, whether it should be the left or right pocket, well, we would like to keep enough resources for social welfare. You can use public funds to build isolation camp instead of lotteries fund. So in other words, the use should be in line with the objective. You should not use resources for social welfare for the sake of convenience, because we always need to catch up. So I do not agree with the Secretary. And then in terms of the procedures, is it true that the lotteries fund has been too stringent on external parties but too lenient towards insiders? Any other questions, Mr. Orr? We still have some time. Chairman, after listening to the Secretary, I understand his point. Now, let me repeat. Can you help, Secretary, to urge your colleagues to speed up? There are some processes that can be faster, but then there are too many different divisions and units in the department, perhaps. Now, I would like to move a temporary motion, if Chairman allows, so that the public will know that we are very concerned about this matter. Mr. Orr, we do have a quorum here, so please go ahead. Chairman, I propose to expedite the implementation of social welfare projects. So there should be a complete review of the procedures, and the administrative procedures should be compressed. Elderly service and rehabilitation service and facilities, should be provided as soon as possible. Mover, Or Chongxing, and seconder, Liang Qichang. Those who are in favor, hands up, please. Okay, unanimous support. So let's conclude our discussion of this item. Thank you. Agenda item 5. Arrangements made and support measures provided by the SWD for the homeless. And we have Ms. Tam. Ms. Pang Kit Ling, Assistant Director, Family and Child Welfare, SWD. We have 2 papers, one prepared by the administration, one by LegCo Secretariat. We have invited the Home Affairs Bureau to join, but they said that since the item reads arrangements made by SWD, so they won't come. So we only have representatives from SWD. Ms. Pang, please go through the paper. Thank you, Chairman. So we are talking about support services for street sleepers. Now, street sleeping is a complicated issue. Chairman, as you said, this involves different bureaus and departments. And since 2004, we have subsidized 3 organizations to operate integrated services team for street sleepers. Service includes late-night outreaching visits or day and late-night outreaching visits, counseling, employment support guidance, service referrals, personal care, for example, bathing, haircut, and meal arrangements. And then emergency shelter or a short-term accommodation, an emergency fund to cover various expenses. For example, short-term payment of the street sleepers. The goal is to enhance the work motivation and skills so as to enhance their self-reliance for reintegration into the community. During the pandemic, the ISTs maintained outreaching visits and proactively reached out to street sleepers. ISTs also made good use of the SWD's emergency fund for meeting the urgent needs of street sleepers. And then we also have integrated family service centers and integrated services centers to help the street sleepers when necessary. I mentioned emergency and short-term accommodation arrangement. At present, there are a total of 635 places, and 222 are provided with subvention of SWD, and there are 413 places provided by NGOs on a self-financing basis. And then people can stay for 6 months, the longest. And if street sleepers have unemployment problem or long-term financial problems, then we also have CSSA offering support for them. So that's a brief explanation of the paper. Thank you. Thank you. Many colleagues expressed interest to speak. Poon Siu Ping, Fernando Zhang, Lee Kwok Lun, Xu Hoi Dik, Leung Yu Chong, Leung Chi Chang, and then myself, Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you, Chairman. As said just now, street sleeping is a very complicated social problem, and many bureaus are involved. It is regrettable that HAB is not here today, but then there is only one government. You said that the government needs to help the street sleepers so that they can refrain from sleeping on the street. Now SWD offers personal support for them. My question is, in the past, how many street sleepers could leave street sleeping? I'm not referring to those deceased. And during the pandemic, There are outreach teams reaching out to the street sleepers. In North Point on Tongshan Road, well, during the fire, street sleepers' belongings and the stores were burned. So during the pandemic, I want to know how many street sleepers had been reached. In 2019 to 2020, the three teams had reached 423 street sleepers. So during the pandemic, if you compare with 2019 to 2020, I think those are two different numbers, right? Number 3, unemployment rate is rising. In the past, some people slept on the streets because of financial difficulty. Now, do you have the statistic of the total number of street sleepers in recent months because of rising unemployment rate? How many more street sleepers were there? And do you have the number of street sleepers on CSSA, please? Thank you.
講緊特別喺疫情期間呢段。
So you're asked about the provision of some data. Thank you for the question. The number of street sleepers we have approached. We collect information quarter by quarter. 1,423 sleepers you find is the figure as at 31st of March. We have to wait for service providers to give us the figures. From when to 31st of March? That's the figure for 2019 to 20, the whole year. Yes. Mr. Poon was asking about the time during the pandemic from January to now, that quarter. It's included 1,423. That's included. But that is the number, not the amount of visits. Yes, the number of people. The question is not answered. Please continue. Well, the number of unemployed street sleepers that are receiving CSSA, we have not differentiated that. We ask for the reasons for being unemployed. So in the CSSA information, it doesn't show whether they are street sleepers or not. That's right. We don't conduct analysis from that perspective. What about those that have stopped sleeping rough? Do you have the figures? We can't provide the figure. There may be many reasons when they stop receiving our outreach service. It's not necessarily the case that they have stopped sleeping rough. If information is supplied to us saying that they have found long-term accommodation, then we may have some, but sometimes they don't give a reason for leaving the service provider. Many years ago when I was working as an outreach social worker, when we close the file, we will say whether we have lost contact, whether the person has died, or whether they have been taken up by other welfare organizations. You don't have this category where files are closed. No. Mr. Poon asked for a lot of figures, but I'm afraid that none of them have been answered. I hope that they will be able to find information and supply the answer afterwards. Sorry, let me give you some more information about CSSA. Well, for street sleepers receiving CSSA in 2019-20, there are 538 of them. So of CSSA recipients, 538 of them are street sleepers. They have once registered as a street sleeper. Dr. Fernando Zhang. The officials said that they have not conducted such analysis. I find it rather strange. There is a social phenomenon. Some people have to sleep rough. They are homeless. This is a social problem. There should be a policy to at least reduce the number of street sleepers because it is not a good phenomenon. I don't rule out the possibility that someone would prefer to sleep rough than staying in a long-term accommodation, but these cases will be few and far between. When we have thousands of people sleeping in the streets, then we need to give resources and to set a direction to resolve this problem. You don't have figures, you don't have data, you don't care about them, you don't track them. Doesn't make sense. How can the government work this way? We just received from SOCO a new survey about the impact on street sleepers under the epidemic. They found that a considerable number of street sleepers that have started to have emerged, and a lot of them become unemployed. They need CSSA, but they don't want it. Now they are unemployed, they have no choice. There are some others who live on the mainland. In the epidemic, they have lost their jobs. They're forced to come back to Hong Kong, but they're so poor that they can't find a place to live. When they returned to Hong Kong, they had to stay in a quarantine camp. They are charged $2,800 when they leave the quarantine camp. They have no money. They have to sleep rough, and still, you chase them for the amount of money. SOCO has identified this phenomenon. Will you find ways to help these new street sleepers? Would you help them to get the $2,800 waived and to arrange for short-term accommodation, say rental in guest houses to house them, or help them find temporary shelters? Measures under the anti-epidemic fund cannot help them. Will you try to find ways to help them to receive unemployment benefits? I think it's tabled, this report from Society for Community Organization, SOCO. I have just seen it. Dr. Zhang has highlighted some salient points in the report. I received the report. I have also read about some press reports, so I'm aware of this survey by SOCO. People who become unemployed and have to sleep in the streets, we have contacted 3 integrated service outreach teams to reach out to them. This group of people will have the most initiative to do something about their situation. We have given flexibility under the emergency fund to these 3 teams. I'm aware that financial assistance have been given to this group of people, say for example, to help them pay deposit or to pay the rent. If the fund is insufficient, they can tell us, and we will flexibly increase the amount available to them. That's what we have been doing. I'm aware that there are some one-off relief funds from NGOs to help the homeless. People who have stayed in a quarantine camp and they're charged $2,800. We're aware of this policy. These centers are managed by the LCSD. If they have difficulties, the LCSD will find ways to help them. So it's not under the purview of the SWD. So as far as you know, that there are some waiver mechanism under the LCSD. I don't have details about such information, but it's been mentioned that if there are people with difficulties, they would the LCSD would find ways to help them. I don't have the figures, so I'm not sure. Perhaps they will take into account the circumstances of the person under quarantine. This is a specific point. If the assistant director is aware of waiver mechanism or a discretion to waive them their fees, then it's something that we don't know. SOCO doesn't know either. Perhaps we can send a letter to ask the LCSD to see if they can waive the $2,800. Mr. Joseph Lee. I joined this panel. I'm shocked. I've never seen a panel where there is only one government official attending the item. Well, it's not a very high-ranking official, no offense. Well, I don't think that the government official, well, if they send a low-ranking official, that means they don't attach much importance to the issue, or that official is really competent. But I'm afraid that is the former case. There is no policy to help the homeless, and the government doesn't attach much importance to street sleepers. I'm not going to drone on about the view of the administration. I'd like to ask if the administration knows how many street sleepers there are. In 2019, there was a survey saying that there were 1,300 street sleepers. Was the number so small that they didn't care about them? No, they talk about hostel, temporary accommodation, outreach, social workers. Then do you actually know how many street sleepers are there? 50% of the people who first become homeless used to live on the mainland. So they're forced to sleep rough. How can you help them? I don't see how the outreach team can help them. According to the report, they earn about $10,000, so they don't want to get CSSA. Even if they want to apply for CSSA, they don't have a correspondence address. You have to pay to rent a post box at the post office. Would you help them? And if they want to become self-reliant, will the Labor and Welfare Bureau help them? If you say that there is an employment team to help them, do you have figures and data to give us? 104 male street sleepers are in the age group between 40 to 50. They are still economically active and they want to be self-reliant. Are there ways for you to help them? You will first have to help them find a job. That is something that is not resolved. You said that for shelters it's not under your purview, but there is one government. I see from government information and the report that there are many street sleepers that are between the age of 40 and 50, and they are male, and they need health care, but there is nothing there for them. There are some collaboration schemes. Has the SWD approached NGOs to help them take care of their health?
唔該，請。
Nothing has been done, Chairman. Thank you. Ms. Pang? Thank you, Chairman. Regarding correspondence address, if these homeless people approach our service teams, our 3 service teams, the 3 service teams allow them to use their address to apply for welfare services. And then regarding employment, our teams will try their best to help. Of course, unemployed people can seek assistance from the Labor Department. If they are now unemployed, if they were employed previously but now unemployed, then we encourage these people to first apply for CSSA so that their living expenses can be taken care of. And then we are going to have an unemployment relief scheme that will help the needy. And then regarding medical needs, I think not only the male have medical needs, all street sleepers do have the need. And we are concerned about that because when we meet the homeless people, many of them are chronically ill. Some even have psychiatric problems or mental illnesses. In the budget, there are proposals that in each team we will add a nurse. So for medical needs, we hope that there would be more support for the street sleepers. So in other words, for the 3 service teams, there would be an additional nurse in each. Well, that's our proposal. So for each team, we will add a psychiatric nurse. Right. Mr. Leung Yu-chung? Sorry, Chairman. My question was not answered. How many street sleepers are there? 1,423. As of the end of March, 1,400 odd. Our service teams and NGOs will gather data in the coming period. Mr. Leung Yu-chung, I want to share a case. 3 weeks ago, this happened in Chun Wan. There's a young person who used to live in subdivided units. Now, his boss asked him to take no pay leave, and after some time, he was laid off. So during the time, his income kept on decreasing, and finally, he has no further income. He has no money to pay rent, and so he became homeless. He had tried to seek help from Caritas in Chunwan. However, Chunwan Caritas was not able to get the necessary support, and so he applied for CSSA to SWD, but there is a certain lead time. And now social workers work from home, so that person could not see the social workers, and so he was given no shelter. He just loitered on the street for 2 to 3 days without any food at all. And then he approached me for help, and then I gave him $500 to solve his problem that day. That day it was already 5, 6 in the afternoon. He had no solution, and I asked my colleague to ask him to go to Kai Fong Association to seek help. And then the next day, Kai Fong Association offered him some food, but no shelter still. This young man was in his 20s. It is not that he is not willing to work. He is willing to work, but then given the current situation, he has no employment and he can't afford to pay rent, and he could only sleep on the street. So during that time in the SWD, your people worked from home. So when there is urgent case, how could you help them? You ask these people to apply for CSSA, but there is the need for vetting, and no immediate assistance can be given. There is no immediate fund or relief for these people. So how do you normally handle these cases? Thank you, Mr. Leung. If that person has still not obtained any assistance, please refer to me. Well, there are points that should not have happened in the case you described just now. During the pandemic, we worked from home. However, our integrated family service centers did not close. They were still open. It's just that the amount of manpower was less. So the Social Security Office colleagues should be able to contact our colleagues. In normal circumstances, some centers still open in the evening, but during the pandemic, the centers did not open in the evening. But there should be a telephone number, because during that time, the centers should be opened, so people can still call for help. So social workers can talk to them on the phone, and appointments can also be made. It doesn't mean that when our colleagues work from home, there is no need for them to meet members of the public. We just want to reduce the number of people in the centers, but appointments still can be made. When people are applying for CSSA, but during that particular month, they have no money at all to meet their living needs, then our integrated family service centers can consider using charity fund to help them during that month. And if they have any need for food, we can offer short-term, temporary support. So later on, I hope you can give me the information so that we can follow up, hoping to help that young person. For the family service centers, well, they can offer some immediate relief. How much money are we talking about? So because that person is applying for CSSA, so we will apply the CSSA standards. We will talk to the security office to see how much more time will be needed to vet the application, and then we will work out the amount. Now, You have got a service pledge of 28 days. So is that still valid or has it been changed? No change as far as I know. So still 28 days. But of course, recently there were a lot more applications. For example, in Sham Shui Po in the past, 100 odd applications per month, now a few hundred. I'm just talking about one Social Security office, so a few times more than in the past. So is it true that we can meet the pledge of 28 days at all times? I dare not say so, but then 28 days is the target that we put on our colleagues. During the pandemic, you could not reach 28 days. So is it like 36 days or 48 days? I do not have the latest information. But our target is not to exceed 28 days. Well, another colleague of mine is responsible for that, but I know that our department has put in place some measures. We employ some retirees, retired civil servants to handle these new applications. So we hope to be able to meet our pledge. Right, we understand that there are a lot more applications during the pandemic. If you can give us the statistic, if you cannot achieve 28 days now, then how many days? This number can help us because many residents asked for that number. So, as in the case of public housing, it is no longer 4 years, 5 months, but 4 years, 7 months waiting time now. For CSSA application, well, you may need 38 days instead of 28 days now. So if possible, please give us a number so that people can be psychologically prepared. I need to get some understanding from my office, but we do not intend to lengthen it. Right? But this is the reality, which has been there for some time. You may not be able to go back to 28 days within a very short period of time. Mr. Leung Chi Chang, and then Chang Chung Tai, KK Kwong. Thank you, Chairman. It is expected that the number of street sleepers will increase. According to so-called survey, 1,300 odd, and Ms. Pang said 1,400 odd. So unemployment problem is getting more serious, and so there will be more and more street sleepers. It is not true that the government knows nothing about the situation. They have done some surveys, and there are some service teams offering support for these people. Now, there were tragic cases about street sleepers, and now the police is doing investigation. I should not comment too much. Government departments, in relation to the street sleepers, may not hold the same value as the community. So as a result, a tragedy happened. Ms. Pang just now said that there was no information, or they are still considering in answering colleagues' questions. This is not satisfactory. I hope to see a basic policy about services for street sleepers. We're talking about common value in society about the street sleepers. How should we try to understand these street sleepers and treat them? Then we'll be able to see more clearly the attitude of society towards street sleepers. In some districts, but not all, support is offered. For example, in very hot or cold weather, street sleepers can have temporary shelter in centers, so they don't need to stay outdoor. For this kind of support, has there been any permanent arrangement? So in case of very cold weather or heavy rain or typhoon, then you will offer that service. Of course, if they are given housing, that will be best. However, will those centers be able to offer permanent service? Will there be centers for street sleepers or homeless? In other words, thank you, Mr. Leung. Regarding the homeless people, the government, the SWOD, understands them. We understand their problems. No one likes to be left unsheltered. I think there are a lot of problems involved and the situation is complicated. If there is urgent need, we hope that we can offer temporary shelter for them. About policies, I think the senior officials will have to take care of that. I believe the senior officials are aware of your concerns. Then under the HAB or HAD, there are community centers. And in very bad weather, for example, if the temperature is below 12 degrees in the urban areas, or when the weather is very, very hot, then those centers will be opened.
That is our mechanism, or during typhoon seasons. Understand, but Mr. Leung is not talking about natural disasters or extreme weather. He asked whether there is an operating center, shelter for the homeless. Well, what I meant was if there is a shelter for in emergency situations, why can't you turn it into a regular one? It's just like, well, people who are affected or people who fall victim to certain things and they have a shelter to go to. It's not accommodation for them. It's just that there is a shelter that runs regularly for people who are in need to use it. For emergency needs, we provide temporary accommodation. We have 600 or so places that are subvented and self-financed ones. They are temporary accommodation. We try to identify more locations to provide emergency accommodation. So far, we have not managed to find any, but we will continue to work on it. Mr. Chung Chung Tai. First, I'd like to say that street sleepers are helpless. It's just like the assistant director sitting there all by herself. There's no one there to help, there is no support. After the Chinese New Year to 2 weeks ago, there has been 2 shocking incidents that this panel should seriously handle. Sham Shui Po, Tung Chau Street, there was a group of street sleepers that have been raided by police officers. These police officers have maliciously damaged their belongings. And there's a press report saying that the police officer in charge of that operation was suspected to have obstructing the course of justice. There are clips showing that the police officers planted knives and other things into the belongings of street sleepers. I think the social welfare department should intervene and to help the street sleepers. There is another one in Fortress Hill, North Point, under a flyover. A lot of street sleepers stay there, but for some reason, I don't know whether it's deliberate or not, their belongings have been burnt to a crisp. I'm not accusing anyone or saying that it's the police who want to chase them away. Residents have a negative sentiment towards street sleepers. This is something that the department should address. Mr. Leung Chi-Chang asked about support. The department only talks about extreme weather or typhoon or during a typhoon. They only need a little support. According to the so-called report, they have a job. They have a job that makes about $10,000. They don't want to apply for CSSA. It's just that they don't make enough to have a home to live, or because of their job they have to stay close to where they work, so they have to sleep in parks or under flyovers. I don't ask for centers so that they can stay overnight. What about doing something like Taipei? You give them some kind of support. You give them a sack to keep their belongings in. When they go to work, they can deposit the bag at social welfare units to keep, so that you will guard their belongings. That is a lot of help. If they have to drag their personal belongings with them while they look for a job, employers will turn them away. If you provide this service, then they don't have to put their belongings under a footbridge or flyover or ask someone else to keep an eye on them. This is a small gesture that would greatly help them. We don't expect you to reduce the number of street sleepers to zero. You only have to mirror the practice in Taiwan to help them. We thank the members' views. Will look into it. If you are concerned that you may have to take responsibility of the belongings, what about providing lockers in parks? You don't even have to provide a padlock. There are large lockers at train stations, like those for backpacks. As long as you have the credential to show that you're a street sleeper, you'll be able to use these lockers. Why don't you do something like that to help them, Mr. Eddie Chu? Thank you. I have two questions. To follow up on what Mr. Chang said, he mentioned about Tung Chau Street. Street sleepers are underprivileged. They will be bullied by various people, this time by the police. When they are being picked on, they should approach social workers, and the SWD should make available social workers to help them. For the Tung Chau Street incident, it was a pastor that helped them, not a government official. It was with great difficulties that they have finally managed to hold the perpetrators responsible. Will you enhance your service so that they can turn to you for help if they're being picked on? a decade ago, when I was living in the Islamic countries, I found that there weren't many street sleepers because there is a religious network. You can go to a mosque to sleep if you are homeless. In Hong Kong, there is no such religious support network, so people turn to the government. Well, it's a basic measure to give them a locker. Why don't you consider using GIC sites? When you grant the land to be developed into social welfare facilities or religious use, then you just put in a condition that they are required to open their facilities for those in need. The government will bear administrative and management fees. Then you can instantly enhance the capacity to accommodate street sleepers. You are now only pushing them to McDonald's because the government have not tried to solve the problem, and it just so happened that our McDonald's open round the clock. It is only a small gesture that involves a small amount of resources. You can ask the NGOs if they're willing to provide this service. They don't even have to provide a proper bed. It's just some space for them to sleep in. Regarding whether we can provide them a place to keep their personal belongings, we will consider that. Whenever street sleepers would like to get help from our social workers, they can approach the 3 support teams or our integrated family service centers. What about GIC sites? Will you consider it? As I said, we will consider it. Dr. Kokaki, thank you. Well, I'll give the Assistant Director more time to answer things that she hasn't answered. The Home Affairs Department is very irresponsible. They have not sent anyone to attend this meeting. After this meeting, will the SWD ask the Home Affairs Department and relevant departments, say for example, the LCSD and the AFCD and the FEHD, to sit together to try to address the problems faced by street sleepers? You represent the SWD. Do you think that arrangement is suitable? We have to consider it. I only asked you whether it is suitable or not. You can't even answer me that. A lot of these matters actually belong to the HAD as well as the LCSD. Apart from giving resources and money to the social workers team, you can't do anything else. You can't instruct the HAD and the LCSD to do anything. No, we can't give instructions for these departments to do anything. It will have to be these departments who do it. I just ask you whether these are suitable measures. For the 1,400 street sleepers, they need the effort of cross-departmental work. If there is a coordination, then if coordination is required, we'll do it. Can you give us a written reply about lockers and about the waiver of quarantine center fees? We give $18 billion to employers. No one wants to be a street sleeper. They have no choice. Can you give us a written reply afterwards? We will. Just afterwards, that means you will. The third question. Even counting the 200 self-financing places, well, there is a shortage. Well, let's say I'm a street sleeper. Can you give us a timetable to solve their problems? I can't give you a timetable, but we will leave no stone unturned. I won't accept that answer. We're talking about the group of people that has no bargaining power whatsoever. I only ask you to give us a timetable. When will you retire? Can you give me a timetable before you retire?
I'm asking you some very specific questions. Well, some time ago, I asked Lau Yicheng some questions, but then all of a sudden, he was fired. He was dismissed. So I'm worried that it is not useful talking to you. So I'm asking you whether it's possible half a year later or 1 year. Just give me a timetable. My request is very humble. I just want a timetable. Let me add some information. In some cases, street sleepers can't afford the rent. Yes, of course, I know that. In the CSSA system, with the approval of LegCo, then the CSSA recipients can have an enhanced ceiling for rent payment. Then they should be able to rent shelter in the market. I think accommodation is the biggest problem. For street sleepers who are unemployed, well, some people are not on CSSA, so what are you going to do with them? As you said, these people have a problem paying rent, so are you going to set up a system to help them pay rent? If they only earn $10,000, well, they already need to pay $6,000 for their family members' food and so on. So they only have like $1,000 to $2,000 available for accommodation, which is not enough. Can the government offer rent subsidy for these street sleepers? Just for these people, not many people will be eligible. If they are non-CSSA recipients, can you help them this way? I can't give an answer right now. Are you going to find solutions towards this direction? I will liaise with the department and the bureau. So next time, can you give concrete timetable about the non-CSSA recipients and concrete solutions on how to help these people? Okay, my turn now. So once again, thank you, Deputy or Assistant Director, for coming. This agenda item is support and assistance offered to street sleepers by SWD. Thank you for coming. As Mr. Zhang Chongtai said, you are on your own and you have to answer all the questions. Some issues are on the bureau level. Some involve many bureaus. And some issues may be on the policy secretaries or bureau directors level. As Mr. Leung Chi-Chang said, there are issues about positioning of street sleepers. Which bureau is responsible in the past? Perhaps HAB, and now it seems that it is not clear which bureau. Perhaps only Mr. Matthew Zhang can say which bureau should be responsible, and then only then will there be policies. If Matthew Zhang evades from his responsibility in this area, if he is going to say that this is an issue involving a number of bureaus, then that means no one will be really responsible. Even if we talk about interim housing, of course, different bureaus need to get involved, not only the Transport and Housing Bureau. So apart from thanking you, I want to say that these street sleepers have become voiceless people, and they are neglected souls. I think this is Matthew Zhang's responsibility. Of course, this is not within your ability. Matthew Zhang has not designated a responsible bureau. Well, the government is only doing all the talk, but no one is doing the real work. About street sleepers, everybody is asking for the number, the exact number of street sleepers. You said that there are 1,423 service recipients. Apart from this number, you cannot give other numbers. For example, how many people can leave street sleeping? In the case of drug addicts, we need to know the number of rehabilitated drug addicts. But then you do not have the important numbers. So it is not because of technical problems. It is because you don't want to take the responsibility. The more numbers are there, the more responsibilities you have. The fewer the numbers are, then the less the accountability will be. So now SWD and HAB approach this issue with this attitude, and this attitude needs to be condemned. You referred to the 3 outreach teams. So there is 150,000 for them during the pandemic. Is the upper ceiling of 150,000 raised? Now, if we are talking about 1 month deposit and 1 month advanced rent payment, well, $150,000 can't help many street sleepers to pay rent. So during the pandemic or after the pandemic, there is the need for some time before recovery. So will this upper limit of 150,000 be adjusted? Now, organizations can shout for help when they have used 25,000. So can this line be adjusted so that they can shout for help before having spent 25,000? Just now we talked a lot about accommodation places. You said 600 odd. SOCO found only 222 places. Now we talked about this in the past. Some places are not for street sleepers, but you counted them all together. As regards support service for street sleepers, I think it is very mean. So I hope you can pay attention to this point. Are you going to give a brief response? Right. Concerning the emergency fund, every year, each team is given $90,000. And at which point will they notify us? If in the future they will only have $22,500 left, then we can inject more funds. One of the teams recently encountered more street sleepers needing their funds, and we gave them $90,000 at one go, even though they have not used up their money. So the upper limit is only an estimate. If they have the need, and if we know the spending arrangement, then we will help them. and it only takes a short time for us to disperse the funds to them. And I will relay the other points back to the Bureau. Dr. Fernando Zhang would like to ask question for the second round. After that, we will close the discussion of this item. I only have a suggestion for the panel as to how this item should be dealt with in the future. We all agree that since the assistant director is sent to this meeting, I think we can tell the administration's attitude concerning this item. And on public occasions or in government's letters, and also in Matthew Zhang's reply letter to us, we can see that there is no bureau taking the lead to handle street sleepers. So this is totally unacceptable. I think we in the WS panel have the responsibility to write to the chief executive to point out to her that this is a serious mistake in policy. Even the CS4A told us that there is no bureau responsible for this matter. But obviously, this is a social problem. And under the pandemic, this social problem will be accentuated. And today, in front of us is only the assistant director. So I think that the chief executive should face up to this matter and direct a bureau to be responsible for the policy. In the future, we should meet again to discuss with the relevant bureau and departments on this item. Recently, a more urgent matter is to encourage the various organizations and groups to make use of our complaint system to discuss with us how to solve the problem. It is Matthew Zhang's responsibility to designate a responsible bureau, but Matthew Zhang has evaded from his responsibility. So we should write to Matthew Zhang's boss, i.e. Carrie Lam, the chief executive. Now we should tell her that the current situation is unsatisfactory because no one is taking care of this matter. Thank you. We will end our discussion of this item here. Next agenda item. Social welfare support provided at community housing after its completion. Ms. Pang is also here to represent the government to brief us. Ms. Pang, please. Thank you, Chairman. The Transport and Housing Bureau supports different types of community housing, and there are different names. The purpose is to help people with long-term housing problem, those households who have been waiting for public housing for a long time. Under SWD, we have various district welfare officers, and we will monitor the completion of different types of housing, population growth, and also welfare need arising from population change. So on district level, our welfare officers will monitor the situation. When there is completion of housing, they will contact relevant district groups and also operators of the community housing to see how to help the residents who have newly moved in and see how to achieve better integration with the mainstream service. And in the paper, we gave a brief explanation of services available for different groups. And the district welfare officers will offer these services. That's all from me. Thank you. I am sincere in saying thank you to you because we have invited the Transport and Housing Bureau to come, but then they did not send any representative. They only gave written response. So even though the Social Welfare Department is not named in this item, only SWD representative is here. So there is no representative from even the Transport and Housing Bureau. So this point should be noted, and I think they should be condemned. Ms. Pang may not be able to answer many questions because many questions will be beyond the purview of SWD or Labor and Welfare Bureau. Any questions from members? Fernando Zhang and Chu Hoi Dik, and I myself would like to ask questions. Dr. Fernando Zhang, thank you, Chairman. It seems that many government departments do not cooperate with this council and district councils. So they do not want to attend meetings of LegCo and district councils. This is a serious problem. They have the responsibility to be accountable to the councils and to give an account to the public. The councils are places where officials are forced to answer questions in public. Well, sometimes government officials do not conduct press briefings, and sometimes after answering some questions, they will just turn and leave.
交代返
We're talking about community housing, not something controversial or political. How come that some departments do not show up? This topic is very important. We're talking about people living in unsuitable housing, living in subdivided flats, people who are homeless, and they've been waiting for a very long time to get public housing. We have Lighthouse. They are for single-parent families or those who are not even eligible for public housing. There are some other community housings that help singletons. So the spectrum is rather wide. Your practice is for one NOCDP for 3,000 people. The needs of people in community housing may be greater than those who are affected by redevelopment. Would you lower the requirement by making available the service with a smaller threshold? For Lok Sin Tong, it's 88 people, Lighthouse, 70 people. Should there be an establishment for community housing support? They are responsible for conducting assessment, providing assistance, and following up on their cases. There should be a proper establishment. At least professional social workers, regular ones to help them. As far as we know, For each community housing project, there is an operator responsible for taking care of the needs of the residents as well as the operation of the project. Most of them are NGOs. They can flexibly use the operating fund. They recruit social workers. There is no proper establishment, but there are social workers providing case follow-up, counseling, and assistance to enhance the ability to deal with the pandemic. They also help them with familial or employment issues. They work very closely with our district social welfare officers. Our officers would contact the operator. Residents will be taken care of if they require mainstream social needs. You mentioned about Lighthouse under Lightby. Most of these cases are followed up by social workers because a lot of these families are single-parent families or women who have fallen victim to an abusive relationship. It is the THB that funds the development of community housing project. They might not be able to understand the needs of the residents. There should be a system, an establishment, and a clearly specified fund in this regard. Regrettably, the THB is not here. I don't know whether they have relevant measures in place. And it's not for the social welfare department to manage such housing. I'm just concerned that residents might not get sufficient resources to get the help they need. Mr. Eddie Chu. The new target set by the chief executive is rather aggressive, talking about 15,000 units in January. And these community housings like Lighthouse are the pioneers. They are the forerunners running at a smaller scale in urban areas. The main course is whether there will be projects that will cater 1,000 units. There is one project at Kam Sheung Road that will provide 1,000 units housing 6,000 people. This is a new norm. Social worker teams serving public housing estates is talking about the involvement of the housing department. Now, under the new norm, an NGO is responsible for a large-scale residential project. You said that when funding was made available, they have already taken care of social welfare service, but the rights and responsibilities are not clearly delineated. The main requirement for the NGO is to provide housing. It's rather unclear as to what kind of social service or support service will be provided as well. We asked the THB, but we did not get a clear answer. You say that social service will be provided and the organization has also catered for the provision of these services. Yes, that is the case for current projects. For larger projects, they will be bigger and in more remote locations. So what is the configuration of provision of social services? Has there been any discussions? I'm talking about projects providing over 1,000 units, and they are not in central locations. If there are no clear indicators or requirements, they may just provide some service but not others. How can you ensure that the needs of the people living in community housing are well taken care of? These projects that we've mentioned are rather small. We are aware that there are larger projects involving more people. We have a similar approach like public housing projects. Residents of community housings are grassroots groups. Before they move in, we will discuss with the operator about how to provide support services to them. We will also involve the district social welfare officers. Say, if there is a new public housing estate, then we will review the social welfare needs of that district. If the scale is small, then we use existing resources. Otherwise, we will find other ways. I don't rule the possibility of using other funds to support them. Community housing is short-term, so these residents will stay there for a short term. Will there be early intervention? Say if I make an application, I have drawn all the plans. If I have not consulted you, then there is no space earmarked for these services. Then it's different from ground floor units being earmarked for these services in public housing estates. These are planned projects. Further studies will have to be conducted, so nothing is confirmed yet. The two bureaus and relevant departments will have to sit to get together to discuss about service demand and relevant issues. We will plan ahead. Now it's my turn. I have 3 questions. First, about the policy. It's covered by many members already. I'd like to ask about the team of social workers. Is there a proper establishment? Is it the responsibility of the THB to ensure that there will be a team of social workers? The assistant director could not answer. The second question is about the community care fund. There is a pilot scheme that provides relocation subsidy. It's been running for 2 years. How many applications have you received? How many of them are eligible? How many of them have been refused and why? This is a pilot scheme. Has it ended? When will the review take place? That is about data. The third one is about operations. I think the assistant director will be able to answer. I have received some inquiries. Say, under IFSC, they have been following up a case, but the family has moved into community housing. They will continue to need family support. The SWD, however, reduced the number of home visits and follow-up actions. After 6 months, they closed the case because they think that the housing need has been taken care of. But when it comes to family support, it's provided by 3 different centers. But the SWD tries to shift the responsibility to others. They think that once the family has been housed in a community housing project, then they can wash their hands. I'd like to ask, when the family moves into community housing, does it mean that the social service will stop? And in relation to family service, how is it different from community housing support? What are the differences in their duties? What is the division of labor? How does the SWD provide support to the operators of community housing?
Regarding establishment of the social worker teams, I can't give an answer. Concerning the community care funds and also relocation, since 28 December 2017, that was the scheme lasting 3 years, so it should end at the end of this year. The estimated number of beneficiaries is 1,000 households, and so far we have received 311 applications. 288 applications were approved and funds were disbursed. 7 applications were withdrawn in the interim period because for those cases they received other relocation subsidy, and 2 cases were not eligible because their family or household income exceeded the limit, and in 14 cases we're still vetting, so the scheme is still underway. It has not ended. What about division of labor? Okay, let me talk about the cases. Now, when it comes to the operator of community housing, the main work is not social welfare support. It's just that they are offering the service. So we should not think that when people are housed in community housing, then the social workers of the operator would be responsible for following up all needs of those families. If there's the support, if there's the need for in-depth long-term follow-up, then the cases should be referred. I think the main responsibility is referring the cases to the right organization. When it comes to additional services, if they offer personal counseling and family support, then that is, of course, welcomed by us, but they should not be regarded as the main service. All right, very clear. Can you clarify with the family service unit once again on this division of labor? Okay, on this item, if there is no other question, then we can conclude our discussion. A or B? No? Then we will adjourn today's meeting here. Thank you, Ms. Pang from SWD. Meeting adjourned.